Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at a topic that I'm sure you've all thought about before, which is how we're going to be able to feed the world in the future with climate change, making it even more difficult.
This is a big question for sure.
And, one possible answer is genetically modified crops. We're going to take a deep dive into that today and see how it might be able to help Nigeria, a country that's facing a lot of challenges right now with food security.
Yeah, and it's especially important because Nigeria is actually already a major player when it comes to agriculture in the world.
Right.
Over a third of Nigerians work in farming, but millions are still facing hunger every day.
That's incredible.
Just that one fact alone shows you how complex this problem is.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, our sources point out that it's not just the amount of food being grown, it's also about the losses after harvest, that happen, and then the need to rely on imports.
Yeah, and all of those existing problems like you just mentioned, you threw climate change on top of that, and it makes it even worse.
Right.
Think about things like unpredictable rainfall or prolonged dry seasons, and then you've got these sudden pest outbreaks that can wipe out entire crops just like that.
Wow.
So yeah, it really is a struggle for Nigerian farmers.
So it sounds like we've got a system that's already under a lot of strain, and then, climate change just comes along and throws a wrench in the works.
Exactly.
So where do genetically modified crops, where do they fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. So imagine a staple crop like cassava.
Okay.
Cassava is hugely important in Nigeria, but it's incredibly vulnerable to different viruses.
Right.
But with genetic modification, we can actually create varieties of cassava that are resistant to those viruses.
Oh, wow.
So you can prevent massive crop losses.
So rather than just trying to increase yields in general, we're talking about safeguarding the crops that they already rely on, making them more resilient.
Exactly.
I see. So what about other crops? Does this apply beyond just cassava?
Absolutely. Take maize, for example. With genetic modification, we can actually develop drought-tolerant maize that needs significantly less water.
Oh, wow.
And that's a game changer in a region that's facing increasingly dry conditions because of climate change.
Yeah.
Studies have shown that these drought-tolerant varieties could reduce the need for irrigation by as much as 30%.
Wow.
Which has huge implications not just for water conservation, but also for the financial burden on farmers.
So it's not just about growing more food.
Right.
It's about using resources more efficiently.
Exactly.
Which seems particularly important in a context like this where, those resources are becoming scarcer all the time.
Exactly. And there's already a real-world example of this happening in Nigeria. In 2018, they introduced bot cotton.
Oh, bot cotton. Yeah, I've heard about that.
Which is genetically modified to resist the bollworm pest.
Yeah. And isn't that a big deal because it helps reduce the use of pesticides?
Exactly. So by engineering the cotton to resist these bollworms, farmers can dramatically cut down on the amount of pesticide spraying they have to do. And that not only saves them money, but it also reduces their exposure to harmful chemicals.
Right.
Which is a win-win for both their livelihoods and their health.
So we're seeing real tangible benefits for farmers.
Absolutely.
Higher yields, lower costs, and a healthier environment. I mean, I can see why there's so much interest in exploring this technology further.
Yeah. But it's not just about those direct benefits. We also need to think about agriculture's role in climate change as a whole.
Right.
Right now, the way we farm contributes a significant amount to global greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I mean, things like clearing land for farming and the use of fertilizers, those are major contributors to greenhouse gases, right?
Exactly.
So how do genetically modified crops fit into that picture?
Well, imagine engineering crops to be more nutrient efficient,
Okay.
so they don't require as much fertilizer.
Right.
That directly translates to fewer emissions. And then there are techniques like conservation tillage, which can be enabled by certain genetically modified crops.
Hold on, what exactly is conservation tillage?
Sure.
That sounds pretty technical.
It's actually a pretty straightforward concept. It's all about minimizing how much you disturb the soil when you're farming.
Okay.
The less you till the soil, the more carbon gets locked up in the ground rather than being released into the atmosphere.
Oh, I see.
It's like turning farmland into a carbon sink.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're talking about a way to actually store carbon in the soil through farming practices.
Exactly.
That seems like a pretty big deal, especially given Nigeria's commitment to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions.
Absolutely. Nigeria has set some ambitious climate goals.
Right.
aiming to reduce its emissions significantly in the coming years. And sustainable agriculture practices, including the use of genetically modified crops, are seen as a crucial part of achieving those goals.
So this isn't just about boosting yields and helping farmers.
Right.
It's about making agriculture part of the solution to climate change.
Exactly.
And that's a really exciting prospect.
It is. But of course, we have to acknowledge that genetically modified crops aren't without their critics.
Right. Whenever you talk about GMOs, there's always that sense of controversy, right?
Of course.
People have concerns about potential risks to biodiversity, possible health effects,
Sure.
and the whole issue of corporate control over seeds.
And those concerns are amplified in a place like Nigeria, which has very strong farming traditions and a deep connection to the land.
Right.
There's a real worry there about disrupting the ecosystem, and farmers fear becoming dependent on specific seed providers.
So it's not just about the science itself, it's about the social and cultural context.
Exactly.
Yeah. It sounds like there's a perception that GMOs are unnatural, even though humans have been modifying crops for centuries through selective breeding.
Right. That perception issue is a big hurdle. It highlights the need for more education and open conversations about the science, the risks, and the potential benefits.
Yeah. We need to kind of get past the fear-mongering and just look at the evidence, which is exactly what we're trying to do here, right?
Exactly.
Give our listener the information they need to understand this complex issue from all sides. So, are genetically modified crops the silver bullet to Nigeria's food and climate challenges?
I wouldn't go that far. There's no single solution that's going to solve everything.
Right.
But they could certainly be a valuable tool in the toolbox, so to speak.
Okay.
The key is to approach this technology strategically and thoughtfully.
And what does that look like in practice?
Well, our sources point to a few key factors that will determine the success of GM crops in Nigeria. Well, it really boils down to a few crucial things. We need careful planning, supportive policies from the government, and perhaps most importantly, buy-in from the local communities. You just can't introduce a new technology like this without taking into account the social and cultural landscape.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's not just about handing farmers a bag of seeds and saying, here, go plant this.
Right.
It's about making sure they understand the technology, feel comfortable with it, and believe it will actually benefit them in the long run.
Exactly. It's about empowering farmers, not dictating to them. They need to be equipped with the knowledge and the resources to make informed decisions about what's best for their land, their families, and their communities.
So are we talking about more than just training programs? What kind of support would really make a difference for these farmers?
Well, access to reliable information is key. Farmers need to understand the science behind GM crops, the potential benefits, and also the potential risks. They need to be able to weigh those factors and make decisions that align with their own values and priorities.
That makes me think about the broader conversation around GMOs in general. You know, it often feels so polarized with these really strong opinions on both sides.
That's true, and it's important to acknowledge that there are legitimate concerns about GM crops.
Right.
We can't just dismiss those out of hand. But at the same time, we can't let fear and misinformation stifle progress, especially when the stakes are so high.
Yeah, it feels like finding that balance is key, right? Recognizing that there are risks, but also being open to the potential benefits, particularly in a place like Nigeria, where food security is such a pressing issue.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so crucial to move beyond these simplistic narratives and really grapple with the complexities. You know, we need to have these nuanced conversations, look at the evidence, and weigh the potential costs and benefits carefully.
It seems like a lot of responsibility falls on scientists and policymakers to create a system where GM crops can be implemented safely and ethically. What would that kind of system look like?
Well, for starters, we need robust regulatory frameworks that ensure the safety of GM crops for human health and the environment. These regulations need to be science-based and transparent so that the public can have confidence in the process.
So it's not just about saying yes or no to GMOs.
Right.
It's about creating a system of checks and balances that ensures responsible development and deployment of this technology.
Exactly.
What else is crucial?
Collaboration is key. We need to break down these silos between scientists, policymakers, farmers, and consumers. Everyone needs to be involved in this conversation, sharing their knowledge, perspectives, and concerns.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, it's about creating a shared understanding of the challenges and working together to find solutions that benefit everyone.
Precisely. And that includes investing in research and development. We need to continue exploring the potential of GM crops, developing new varieties that are tailored to specific needs and contexts. We also need to invest in research that addresses the concerns that people have, like the potential impact on biodiversity.
So it's about constantly learning and evolving, refining the technology, and making sure it's used in a way that's truly sustainable.
Right.
That brings up another point, the role of public perception.
Yeah.
How do we address the fear and misinformation that often surround GMOs?
Public perception is a huge factor. There's often a disconnect between scientific consensus and public opinion,
Yeah.
and that can create a lot of mistrust.
Right? It can feel like people are talking past each other rather than actually engaging in a meaningful dialogue. So how do we bridge that gap?
I think transparency is key. Scientists need to do a better job of explaining their work to the public in a way that's clear, accessible, and engaging. We need to move away from all the jargon and technical language and find ways to connect with people on an emotional level.
So it's not just about presenting the facts and figures.
Right.
It's about telling the story of this technology, helping people understand the potential benefits in a way that resonates with their own lives and concerns.
Exactly. We need to create spaces where people can ask questions, express their concerns, and engage in respectful dialogue. It's about building trust and fostering a sense of shared ownership over these technologies.
That makes me wonder about the future of GM crops. Are we seeing any new trends emerge that could potentially address some of these concerns and pave the way for wider acceptance?
One of the most exciting developments is the rise of gene editing techniques like CRISPR, which offer even more precise and targeted ways to modify crops.
Oh, CRISPR. Yeah, I've heard that term thrown around a lot lately. What makes it different from traditional genetic modification?
Well, with CRISPR, scientists can make very specific changes to a plant's DNA without introducing foreign genes.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of like using a scalpel instead of a hammer.
Okay.
So it allows for much greater control over the process.
That sounds incredibly precise. So what are the implications for developing new crops?
It has the potential to really speed up the development of new crop varieties and allow us to target very specific traits. So we could develop crops that are resistant to specific diseases, have enhanced nutritional content, or are better adapted to changing climate conditions, all with greater precision and efficiency than ever before.
That's incredible. It sounds like CRISPR could really be a game changer, not just in terms of the science itself, but also in terms of addressing some of the concerns that people have about traditional GMOs.
It's certainly a promising technology. However, it is important to note that gene editing is still relatively new, and we need more research to fully understand its long-term implications. But the potential is undeniably vast.
So while there are still questions to be answered, it seems like CRISPR could open up a whole new chapter in the story of genetically modified crops. What about the role of consumers in all of this? Are we seeing any shifts in public opinion about GM foods?
It's a complex landscape, but there are signs that attitudes are evolving, particularly among younger generations who are more concerned about climate change and sustainability.
Right.
If people see GM crops as part of the solution to these pressing challenges, they may be more open to embracing them.
That makes sense. It seems like there's a growing awareness of the interconnectedness of our food system, the environment, and our own well-being. And perhaps that awareness will drive a more nuanced and pragmatic approach to technologies like genetic modification.
I'm hopeful that's the direction we're headed in. As we face increasingly complex challenges, we need to be open to all the tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And that includes technologies that may have been controversial in the past.
So it's not about blindly embracing any new technology.
Right.
It's about having those open and honest conversations, weighing the potential benefits and risks carefully, and working together to find solutions that are both innovative and responsible.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this such a fascinating topic to explore. There are no easy answers, no silver bullets. It requires critical thinking, open-mindedness, and a willingness to engage with complex issues.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. But before we wrap things up, I'd love to get your take on one final question.
Sure.
If we zoom out from the specifics of Nigeria and look at the global food system as a whole, what role do you see GM crops playing in the future?
That's a big question. But it's a crucial one to consider. As the global population continues to grow and as climate change intensifies, we're going to need to find ways to produce more food with fewer resources in a way that's sustainable and equitable.
And you believe that GM crops can be part of that solution?
I do. I think they have the potential to play a significant role in addressing those interconnected challenges, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to require a fundamental shift in our approach to agriculture.
Okay.
We need to move away from these industrial monocultures
Yeah.
and embrace more diverse, resilient, and ecologically sound farming practices.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about how we use it.
Right.
It's about creating a food system that works in harmony with nature, rather than trying to dominate and control it.
Exactly. And that requires a shift in mindset, a recognition that we're part of the ecosystem, not separate from it. We need to start thinking about food production in a way that nourishes both people and the planet.
That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
It seems like the conversation around GM crops is really a conversation about the future of food itself and the kind of world we want to create.
Precisely. It's about our values, our priorities, and our vision for the future. And those are conversations we need to be having, not just in academic circles, but in our communities, in our homes, and around our dinner tables.
Well said. This has been such an eye-opening discussion. We've gone from the very basics of GM technology to the complex ethical, social, and ecological dimensions of its implementation. It's clear that this is a topic that deserves our attention, our critical thinking, and our willingness to engage in meaningful dialogue.
I couldn't agree more. And I hope our listeners feel empowered to continue exploring this topic on their own, to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to be part of shaping a more just and sustainable food future.
I think that's a perfect note to end part 2 on. But don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with our final thoughts and a provocative question to leave you pondering. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this complex world of genetically modified crops. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has.
We've gone from the science to the farms to the global picture. And I'm really curious to hear your final takeaway, from all of this. What really stands out to you?
What strikes me is how much the success of this technology really depends on getting the human element right. It's not just about the seeds themselves. It's about the farmers, the communities, and that whole system of support that needs to be in place.
Yeah, that resonates with me. Earlier, we were talking about how crucial it is to have that local buy-in.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it goes way deeper than just convincing people to try something new, right?
Right. Our sources emphasize that it's really about empowering farmers, giving them that knowledge, those resources they need to make the best choices for their own unique situations. That might mean training programs, on how to manage these new crop varieties, but it also means addressing that broader social and economic context.
So it's about more than just handing them a new tool. It's about making sure they can actually use that tool effectively and benefit from it in a real sustainable way.
Exactly.
Which seems especially crucial in a place like Nigeria, where farming isn't just a job, it's a way of life.
Absolutely. You can't just drop in some new technology and expect it to seamlessly integrate into those existing systems and traditions. You need a deep understanding of that local context, the needs of the farmers, and those cultural values that shape their relationship to the land.
This has been such a fascinating exploration. I mean, we've uncovered so many layers to this issue: the scientific breakthroughs, the ethical considerations, the social and economic implications. It's clear that genetically modified crops aren't a simple fix.
Definitely not.
But they do hold incredible potential.
They do.
So what do you think? I mean, that potential, can it only be realized if we approach it thoughtfully and responsibly?
I think so, yeah. It's about acknowledging both the potential benefits and the potential risks, and working collaboratively to find solutions that really address the needs of all those stakeholders.
So it's about having those difficult conversations, being willing to challenge our own assumptions, and always striving to find that balance between innovation and responsibility. I mean, if our listeners are walking away with just one thought from this deep dive, what would you want it to be?
I think it would be this. The future of food, it's not set in stone. It's something we're all actively shaping through the choices we make, the policies we support, and the conversations we engage in.
That's a really powerful reminder. It emphasizes that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and sustainable food system. Whether it's through our individual choices as consumers, our engagement in our communities, or our support for policies that really align with our values.
And ultimately, that's what makes this conversation so important. It's about so much more than just genetically modified crops. It's about our relationship with food, with nature, and with each other. It's about our vision for the future and the kind of world we want to leave for generations to come.
Well said. I think this deep dive has given us all a lot to think about, and hopefully it sparked some curiosity and inspired some further exploration. So thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep striving for a better future.